You are listening to the So Now What podcast with Lana Manikowski, episode number 129. Welcome to another episode of the So Now What podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, you can see my perfect little furry puppy Coco here next to me in the episode. She decided to hang out with me. We'll see if she keeps quiet and doesn't end up barking somehow throughout the episode. If you didn't know I had a YouTube channel, I invite you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Lana.Manikowski on YouTube. You'll know it's the right YouTube channel if I'm in a yellow shirt in my profile picture. If you come across the one with me with a red shirt on, that is not the one that I commonly update. That is an old, outdated version. So go to Lana.Manikowski on YouTube. And you can watch me and probably hear some of my outtakes on these podcast episodes that don't get edited out. So there might be some funny blunders if you watch the episode on YouTube versus listening to it on the podcast. So before we get started, I wanted to remind you that I was asking last week for people to rate and review the podcast. Thank you to those who have. Your $5 Starbucks gift card is on its way to you. If you have yet to, please rate and review the So Now What podcast on whatever medium you listen to the podcast on. The reason I love for people to rate and review, obviously, because I want to know how the podcast is impacting you and if whether it's helpful, how it's helpful, if there's more things that you'd like to hear about during the podcast. All of those things are important to me. But most importantly, the more ratings and reviews that the podcast has, the more likely the algorithm gods will put this podcast in a search if somebody who is searching to create a life they love after finding out that they're unexpectedly not going to become a mom, they'll come across this podcast and hopefully find some opportunity to create a connection back to themselves, even if they can't have the children they dreamed of. So this week, I'm going to talk about a pretty important concept that I gathered during my advanced certification that I received in grief and post-traumatic growth. Did you know that I had an advanced certification in that? I don't feel like I talk about it as much as I should because, to my knowledge, I am the only coach in this space who has gone on to pursue an advanced certification in grief. And the reason I decided to go after this certification is because I feel like there was so much of my story and so much of the feelings that I was having when I realized not only that I was infertile and had to go through fertility treatments, but more so when my journey ended without a child. I felt as though I was in severe grief, but because I had been aware that grief only was valid for people who lost something tangible, I didn't necessarily see myself fitting into that grief category or into this place of acknowledging that somebody who only ever lost a dream of motherhood could actually be grieving a dream. And that's why I decided to pursue my advanced certification in grief and post-traumatic growth, because I feel like there's so many of us out there that are going through so much that feels like grief, but we don't know how to put words around it. And maybe we don't have the resources that we deserve in order to manage through that. So today's concept I'm going to talk to you about is going to be focusing on one of the most powerful words in grief. And when you're thinking about this word, it's something that you use probably multiple times in a sentence in a day. And it's easy to spell. It only has 3 letters, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but the word is and, A-N-D. And there's so many false binaries in grief that make it harder than it needs to be. And, I remember hearing, and you probably heard too, that you can either be sad that you couldn't become a mom, or you could be grateful that you don't have to raise a child in this world. And it's like, oh, why does it have to be one or the other? Why does it have to be so binary? Can we just be sad that we couldn't become moms and also grateful at times that we don't have to navigate raising children in this crazy political climate and with these atrocities that are going on in the world and these things that feel so wrong and unjust and different than what life was like when we were kids or the things that we were experiencing. And I just wish that we didn't have to choose between being sad and being grateful. And the truth is, you don't have to. You can be both. You both, but no one is telling us that we can be sad and grateful in the same moment of life. And that's why I think a lot of us end up forcing ourselves to feel grateful because we think that emotions are binary, that you can't coexist with these opposite end of the spectrum type emotions. And we've been taught and maybe almost been shamed into believing that we should not be sad. Like how many times, have you been sad about something and people are like, "Oh, don't cry. Don't cry." Like why shouldn't you be sad? And the goal of life is to be happy, of course. Like everyone should be happy 24/7, which I don't agree with. So when we try to make ourselves grateful or happy or joyous 24/7, it's not helpful because the sadness that's there or the emotion that is there that we're trying to mask or trying to shame ourselves out of feeling gets suppressed, it gets pushed down, it gets ignored and avoided. And when you've been in grief for a while, you know that when you try to avoid feeling those things, they just multiply. Or you might be able to back them out of your day for a moment of time or for segments of time, but then they come at you like a tsunami and overtake you because they've been ignored and they've been pushed to the side. And we just we shouldn't have to create these situations where there's only one right way of feeling. And none of that would be necessary, this, forced gratitude or this sweeping emotions or your sadness under the rug if we just used the word and instead. So let's talk about that. We can be sad that we couldn't become moms and grateful that we don't have to raise children in this climate. And in grief, things are just, there's room for everything that we feel. And you might not realize that grief doesn't have to be this thing that always feels heavy and wanting to keep you under the blankets during the day and want to keep you from going out and experiencing life because you're feeling grief. Grief can be associated with other things as well. And basically everything that we feel is part of grief. On all emotions apply and allow us to create a space so that grief can be nuanced, because it really is nuanced. And so is being a human. That's nuanced too, but nobody really tells us that it's okay. So think about this. Like you have an awesome day at work, you come home, you go through the mail, and today felt great until you opened an envelope that had an invitation to a baby shower. And then you started crying and you thought, I was doing so well until I cried. And what if we replace the word until with the word and? And I was doing great today and I cried when I opened a baby shower invitation. And you made space for those tears. And it doesn't make tears wrong. You were doing great. You had a great day. Those things that were great, that you were happy about and felt really meaningful and powerful throughout your day, did not go away just because you got a baby shower invite. So you were doing great and you also cried. It's not either or. And so here's another one. I was so proud of myself, and then I got angry, as though you can't be proud of yourself and be angry at the same time. And so let's swap it out and use and. So I was very proud of myself and I felt angry. Anger is just as much a part of a human experience as part of our grief experience and as any other emotion. So insert whatever emotion. Maybe you were having a great day and you came home and felt super deflated. Whatever the emotion is, you can feel both. You are entitled to feel both of those emotions. And it doesn't mean anything about you. And it doesn't mean that you can't be proud for feeling a feeling. And how about this is another one that comes up a lot, that people feel lost without motherhood, but you're discovering strengths that you never knew you had. So, how about instead of but, we say, I sometimes feel lost without being a mom or without motherhood in my life. And I'm discovering strengths I never knew I had. Like both can coexist. You don't have to find strengths and avoid feeling lost. You can feel lost and also discover strengths that you never knew you had. So do you see how it just sort of like opens things up when you just add that and in there instead of but or then or until? Like it's kind of like everything before that just gets thrown out in the garbage. And you just have to be now this emotion that you don't feel proud of being. And I feel like it takes away so much of our story when we don't allow ourselves to coexist with these emotions. So really genuinely, before I did a deep dive and became intrigued in understanding grief for somebody like us who maybe never, had that motherhood in our lives or never had that positive pregnancy test or never had the miscarriage, whatever the case is, there's this disenfranchised grief, I think, that comes with being childless, not by choice, and feeling grief, and it's not recognized. But in the earlier days, I felt like I would have to get to this point in my life where I would feel grateful 24/7. And I'm not exactly sure how I picked up on that. Somehow I learned that gratitude trumps all. And in order to truly love life, I have to be grateful every single moment of the day. So unfortunately, but fortunately, I learned that that does not have to be the case. And you do not have to be grateful for every single thing that happened to you. And I'm so glad that I just don't believe that anymore. Like life feels so much easier that I am not like chasing this toxic positivity that I have to be grateful 24/7. So I'm not grateful that I failed IVF and I love my life. It's not like this either or for me anymore. I don't have to be grateful that I didn't become a mom in order to love my life, and neither do you. We can still believe that something happened to us that wasn't wonderful. That journey that we went through, those years, those thousands of dollars, those emotions, those changes to our body, the injections, like I could go on and on. We don't have to be grateful for all of those things in order to love your life. So here's to embracing the and I'd love to know, how can you make use of that? The next time something comes up and you want to tell yourself that it's an either or, how can you just insert the and make things a lot easier and calmer and recognizing of the fact that you are a beautiful human who is navigating this path of life. So I hope you have a beautiful week. I love you. And remember that it's never too late to discover your meaning. I'll talk to you next week.